Being part of the Vatican-accredited media personnel was no doubt an experience of a lifetime that I'd like to share. Now, one of the many questions that I got before going to Rome ahead of the papal visit to Africa was how I felt that I would be next to God. Well, one of the most apparent things about Pope Francis is that he is very human. From getting to personally shake hands with the Pope to following him through his African visit alongside 70 other journalists, here are my reflections on moments with the Pope in Africa.
Welcome to Kenya, Your Holiness.
All of us are called to seek the truth, to work for justice and reconciliation, and to respect, protect, and help one another.
I was one of the 4 Kenyan journalists among the 70 Vatican-accredited media personnel, or VAMP. I could tell we were in for a very tight 5-day schedule following Pope Francis on his first visit to Africa from the itinerary we had been given. As we checked in, we all handed in our passports and yellow fever certificates that we would get on our way back to Rome. This was to ensure that we all move as a pool and no one detoured. Our assignment while traveling with the Pope would see us arrive at the predetermined venues before Pope and leave before him. The only time we would be with him throughout would be while on the papal plane. It was quite exhilarating that I would be in the same plane as Pope Francis. We were aboard Alitalia AZ4000, an ordinary commercial plane, Shepherd 1 as some refer to it, although there is no formal title. If anything, this was a glorified media center. Soon after embarking on the Italian carrier, Pope Francis would be coming to our cabin to greet us. Now, most of them know the drill and have covered Pope's visits and are actually Vatican correspondents representing various print and broadcast media outlets. But for my 3 Kenyan colleagues and I, this was an encounter we would want to tell our grandchildren about.
I Kenyani, Ugandesi e I fratelli della Centroafricana.
For about half an hour, Pope Francis shook each of the 70-plus journalists. Caroline, seated next to me, who writes for French weekly magazine, decided to arm the Pope with mosquito repellents and a copy of what is said to be the Pope's favorite movie. Some had videos from well-wishers to share with him, and he took the time to watch. I finally got the opportunity to shake his hand.
Masai, NTV.
He then left for his section of the plane where he sat with his aides as the journalists got to typing and editing stories for their respective newsrooms. Many are able to send their stories, especially the print version, using the airplane Wi-Fi. As they did that, I asked Caroline, who was quite apprehensive over the whole African trip, about her gifts to the Pope.
I gave him 2 things. One was a DVD of the film Le Festin de Babette, with a film, a movie that he liked very much. And the second thing was the spray against mosquitoes. And so I gave him that, and I said, I'm afraid about the trip and about mosquitoes. He said, you should be afraid about mosquitoes because that is much more dangerous.
After a 6-hour flight, the papal plane touched down on time at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. President Uhuru Kenyatta and the First Lady were visibly elated to receive Pope Francis.
Thank you very much. Happy to have you. It's my wife.
Kenya has hosted high-profile guests this year, But this visit by the leader of the Catholic Church is top on the list in the Visitors Book of 2015. To the awe of many Kenyans, Pope Francis chose to ride in a simple Honda to State House. That, along with the open, unarmored Pope Mobile, would be his mode of transport from one venue to the next. At State House, Nairobi, Pope Francis had a meeting with current and former leaders as well as other dignitaries.
We know we must win this war, and it falls on me to lead it. And Holy Father, I ask for your prayer.
After his courtesy visit to State House, Pope Francis then left to the Apostolic Nunciature, where he would spend the 2 nights of his Nairobi trip. The VAMP team, meanwhile, all stay in one hotel to make logistics manageable. Early each day, all the journalists received the speeches that Pope would be delivering, but they would be embargoed until the Pope delivers the specific speech.
People welcome to the home of the Holy Father.
The second day in Kenya had plenty of functions for the team to cover. The highlights being the Pope's ecumenical and interreligious meeting, then to the University of Nairobi to celebrate Mass, where thousands had been waiting. Along the way to the various meetings, the Pope would stop randomly to greet several individuals. The other highlight on his second day in Kenya was a speech delivered at the United Nations Environment Headquarters in Nairobi, where he used the platform to call on world leaders who were set to converge for the climate talks in Paris to be good stewards of the environment.
Y me atrevo a decir, hasta catastrófico, que los intereses particulares prevalezcan sobre el bien común y lleven a manipular la información para proteger sus propios proyectos.
It would seem, however, that the Pope saved the best for last while in Kenya. While at Kangemi, he expressed his dismay at the disparity between the rich and the poor, a situation brought about by some faceless developers given to greed. This was a message that was going to resonate with the youth whom he was going to meet in his last public address while in Kenya. It was quite the joyous occasion at the Kasarani Stadium, but Pope Francis was not smiling when he spoke against corruption, tribalism, and radicalization.
Destruction out of fanatism.
Manuel preguntaba, ¿cómo hacer para que un fanatismo ideológico no nos robe a un hermano, no nos robe a un amigo?
How do we make it such that fanatical idealism doesn't take us to be robbed of a brother or sister?
Hay una palabra que puede parecer incómoda, pero yo no la quiero evitar.
There is a word which might seem uncomfortable to the ear, but I don't want to avoid it.
Porque ustedes la usaron antes que yo.
You know it for me.
But he also threw the challenge back at the youth and citizenry.
A vos te toca elegir.
To all of you is open the choice.
Para mí una dificultad es un camino de destrucción.
For me, is this a path of destruction?
O es una oportunidad para superar el bien mío, de mi familia, de mis amigos y de mi país.
Or is it an opportunity to overcome this difficulty for me, for my family, and for this country?
In this symbolic gesture, Pope Francis left Kenya with a powerful call to unity for the common good.
All are a nation.
We are all a nation.
It was soon time for the VAMP team to leave for the airport ahead of the Pope.
Thank you.
Next stop, Entebbe. Then the Central African Republic, where we saw why many were concerned. for the safety of the Pope. An hour and a half after leaving Nairobi, Pope Francis arrived in the land of the martyrs, quite a significant part of his African trip. And Alberto Gaspari, the man always next to Pope during trips, was responsible for all the logistical planning. Well, for a country that is over 40% Catholic, President Museveni was well pleased that he was going to be hosting Pope Francis, and this was evident even in his side comments. From his first address with Ugandan leaders, it was clear what the Pope's highlight would be while there.
The martyrs, both Catholic and Anglican, are true national heroes. They also remind us that despite our different beliefs and convictions, all of us are called to seek the truth, to work for justice and reconciliation, and to respect, protect, and help one another as members of our one human family.
The visit to both the Anglican and Catholic Martyrs Shrine in Namugongo came on his second day in Uganda.
So this is the command post. These are soldiers guarding him. So from here he would command his men to go and execute the martyrs. He was only 14 years.
Pope Francis could not hide the sorrow he felt as he was told about the ordeal that most of the renowned 25 martyrs of Uganda went through under the Kabaka then. This formed the basis of the mass he led at the Catholic Shrine of the Martyrs of Namugongo. After the homily, it was soon time for the VAMP team to leave for the next venue as others tried to edit and send the images they captured back to the newsrooms. Similar to Kenya, the last public meeting Pope Francis had in Uganda was with the youth at the Kololo airstrip. Though some had expected the Pope to address the harsh laws and treatment against homosexuality and the harsh treatment against the opposition, his simple message was one of encouragement that in difficult times they ought to pray. The following day would see the last phase of his trip to the Central African Republic, a country many were not sure about given the instability. The atmosphere at Mpoko International Airport was quite tense. Nothing like the welcoming parties that received Pope Francis in Uganda or Kenya. Without much fanfare, Pope Francis, followed closely by a section of the VAMP team, was escorted by mostly UN peacekeepers to the presidential palace. There was restricted access here, with most of the journalists being escorted to the hotel they would be staying at for only one night. There was a good number of people hoping to catch a glimpse of the Pope. The heavy presence of security personnel was, however, hard to ignore. Acting President Catherine Samba-Panza had personally invited Pope Francis to her country, expressing hope that his visit would bring the sectarian violence between the Muslim Seleka rebels and anti-Balaka Christian militia to a halt. For a country that has had 13 political regimes since 1960, President Samba Panza, who is leading the country to elections as a non-partisan on December 27th, knows too well the importance of having the Pope's presence during their hour of need. Thousands have been affected directly by the conflict, and that is why Pope Francis visited a refugee camp not too far from the presidential palace. These children are amongst almost 500,000 people who have been displaced by the sectarian violence that flared up 2 years ago. Having met some of the refugees, Pope Francis on the following day embarked on what would be a very significant but daring affair, visiting a mosque in a sensitive area aboard an open Pope-mobile. The man in charge of the security for Pope Francis, Domenico Gianni, commander of the Pope Security Detail. He leads this team of over 12 special security officers during the African trip. The stay for Pope Francis at Kuruku Central Mosque was perhaps the shortest engagement he had while in Bangui, but he delivered his message.
No al odio, no alla vendetta, no alla violenza, in particolare a quella che è perpetrata in nome di una religione o di Dio. Dio è pace, Dio sarà.
In less than 30 minutes, he was out of the mosque, and that is when there was a slight scare. All was well, however, as Pope Francis soon made his way to the Barthélemy Boganda Sports Stadium for final mass. The stadium was well guarded by hundreds of UN peacekeepers, and as the mass went on, I asked some of VAMP members how they felt now that it was almost over.
And I've never been to Africa before. This is also my first time. I normally report on the Pope from the Vatican, so this kind of a scene with tanks and military and all the dancing and singing, even at the Mass. We saw in Kenya the bishops dancing in the Congo line. I mean, you just never see that at the Vatican. So for me, that was really exciting and interesting to see here in Africa, and I think pretty particular to the African countries. So I hope that he was able to transmit hope and the idea of a better future, but I also question whether, for these people, is that going to be possible? Obviously part of the reason that he came here is to draw international attention to the situation, because this is a country that really hasn't received enough international aid and attention. So that struck me in particular here in the Central African Republic.
As a Zambian, I'm not worried because I've been to Kenya, I've been to Uganda several times, but I've never been to Central Africa. And the travel advisory that were coming from media were very, I think they were giving a doomsday scenario, and almost as if, why is this Pope going there? And I think the moment we landed at Bangui airport, that's when it became clear why this Pope wanted to come. Streets and streets of people cheering and welcoming him. I think nobody expected that, and there was almost like a silence in the whole bus with these international journalists that were with me. And eventually actually going through the program itself, seeing the joy. And when we asked the people, what did you think when they say that the Pope shouldn't come to? And they told us, all those who didn't want the Pope to come here are the enemies of peace.
As we walked out of the stadium, I had mixed emotions. Partly happy that I would be heading out of this heavily guarded environment, but sad for my brothers and sisters in the Central African Republic living in uncertain times, hoping that the upcoming elections would bring stability. In the heavily guarded motions through the streets of Bangui, one wonders what it would take to clear the streets, replacing the peacekeepers with economy builders. And seeing Central African Republic take off to a new horizon. On the flight back, Pope Francis responded to questions from the VAMP team.
Con noi dal Kenya si chiama Mark Masai e del National Media del Kenya.
What do you tell the world that thinks that Africa is only war-torn and full of destruction?
Che cosa dice al mondo che pensa che l'Africa è soltanto vittima delle guerre e sottoposta alla distruzione?
L'Africa sempre è stata sfruttata da altre potenze. Dall'Africa venivano in America venduti gli schiavi. Ci sono potenze che solo cercano di prendere le grandi ricchezze dell'Africa. Insomma, il continente più ricco forse. Ma non pensano a aiutare a crescere il paese, che possa lavorare, che tutti abbiano lavoro. Lo sfruttamento. L'Africa è un martire dello sfruttamento.
A day after he arrived back in Rome, Pope Francis had his weekly audience with pilgrims and faithful at the St. Peter's Basilica, where he gave a summary of his African visit.
Dapprima il Kenya, poi l'Uganda e infine la Repubblica Centroafricana. Esprimo nuovamente la mia riconoscenza alle autorità civili e ai vescovi di queste nazioni per avermi accolto e ringrazio tutti coloro che in tanti modi hanno collaborato. Grazie di cuore.
2 weeks after Pope Francis had delivered the message of peace and reconciliation to Central African Republic, violence was reported to have broken out in the capital, Bangui, as people voted in a referendum. One can only wonder what the Pope would have said had he visited Bujumbura in Burundi, where over 400 people have been killed since April and over 200,000 displaced when President Pierre Nkurunziza announced his intention to run for a disputed third term. Right now, the row is over how much the international community has neglected Burundi. But if the message of hope, peace and reconciliation that Pope Francis brought to Kenya, Uganda and Central African Republic could be echoed and heeded by Burundi and the rest of the continent, would Africa need as much international support as is always portrayed? Or can she actually look within herself for answers? Just some of the matters I pondered as I left Rome, with the hope that as a Kenyan journalist, I would be part of the collective effort that will help rewrite the narrative on Africa. Mark Masai, NTV.
All of us are called to seek the truth, to offer justice and reconciliation, and to respect, protect, and help one another.